In a time before government, back when human beings were hunter-gatherers living out there in the wild, what were people like? What were the interactions between people like? This question has been common to find in philosophy circles for hundreds of years. They say it like this: what is the state of nature? What are people like when there is no government? And there's a lot of different perspectives on this. I'll point out a couple. Some say if there's no government to force people to do the right thing or to force people not to treat each other really badly, they're going to do exactly that, right? So this is the view that we'll hear from Thomas Hobbes and other thinkers. The view that if there's no government, people treat each other horribly. They're going to steal and kill. It's going to be awful. This is very different from the view of thinkers like Karl Marx, who say without government, people actually treat each other really well. We're going to look out for each other's interests. We're going to, help out the people that need help, work really hard to make everybody better off. What do you think? What is the state of nature? What's the world like without government? Today we'll hear from contractarianism, social contract theory, and as I mentioned, the first big proponent of social contract is Thomas Hobbes. What's the basic idea? The basic idea of social contract theory is that there is no morality outside of society. Once we enter into society, we consent to the rules, laws, and social norms of that society, and we are morally obligated to follow those rules, laws, and norms. So, I mentioned a couple times, Thomas Hobbes, he is an English thinker from, I believe, the 1600s. And Hobbes had a pretty bold perspective. He believed without government to restrict people's innate kind of worst tendencies, innate violence perhaps, life without government and without society, nasty, poor, brutish, and short. Pretty wicked. Nasty, poor, brutish, and short. A war of everyone against everyone. Survival of the fittest. Radical mistreatment of everybody. Everybody just digging and clawing just to get ahead a little bit. The solution to this problem, says Hobbes, is for everyone to give up their rights. All of their rights to try and get ahead, to take care of themselves, and give it to an all-powerful central government, which he names Leviathan. Leviathan, the name of his famous work, his book. Give all your power to Leviathan, and Leviathan will establish rules and laws that will protect us. Once the absolute power of government steps in, it can protect everyone from each other. It establishes order. It protects everybody from everybody else. Hobbes argues there is no morality outside of government. If there is no society and no government to establish the rules, then there is no right and wrong. That war of everyone against everyone is morally acceptable. Without government to tell you what is right and wrong, you just do whatever you want. Clearly, Hobbes is arguing for a government with absolute power. So, contractarianism has some pretty clear advantages and disadvantages. One advantage, the rules are clear. What's the morally right thing to do? Well, the legal thing. You do what the law tells you to do. If the law says, eat bananas for breakfast on Tuesday, that's what you do. You are morally obligated to do what is legal. There is a clarity in that. There's no ambiguity. It'll definitely help us make moral decisions. Is that the right thing to do? Is it legal? If yes, yeah, do it. If not, no. That is morally wrong. There might be some disadvantages. First, contractarians believe that we consent. Rational, free people consent to being yoked by this government so that we can control our relationships with each other. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to give up my radical freedom to do literally whatever I want so that this absolute power of government protects me from the people near me. How did I consent to that? Did you guys sign that contract to agree to society's laws? I didn't get that contract. I was just born. Did I consent? Maybe. Or maybe my ancestors consented and therefore I implicitly consent. Obviously, this idea of consent of the governed might be a little tricky for the contractarians to actually work out. Another problem, what if what's right is not what's legal? What if you truly believe that there is a moral truth that the law has missed, as have many throughout history? For one famous example, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as we've mentioned, in his letter from a Birmingham jail, he says, the laws are wrong. Well, according to Hobbes, the laws can't be wrong. When the laws are oppressing certain people, they're morally correct. And later, in the future, if those laws are changed, well, they're morally correct when they're changed too. It's morally right. Literally whatever is legal is the morally right thing, because that's what we consenting, rational, free-willed people have agreed to. Obviously, there's a little bit of a contradiction there, perhaps. John Locke, another famous contractarian, he writes the second treatise on government. He wrote a few. He didn't just, name the first one the second. That would be pretty bold. But in his second treatise on government, he really agrees with Hobbes about the basic structure of the state of nature. With no government, with no limits or rules, people will treat each other horribly. Maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't. But so says John Locke. But he says, well, that doesn't, just because we said people treat each other really bad if there's no government, that doesn't necessarily mean we have to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and have the absolute power of a monarchy, as advocated Thomas Hobbes. Maybe there's some in between here, where we have a government that protects our individual rights, but doesn't go so far as to have this kind of absolute power that Hobbes describes. Locke also says there's more nuance to right and wrong than just the legal thing is the moral thing. There's a little more to it. And he points to the natural law tradition. Well, what is the natural law tradition? Well, we'll get to that a little later.